In June 1983, at the height of his final battle with cancer, Monsignor Geno Baroni gave what was to be his last public speech to community development practitioners. At his alma mater, St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland, he spoke to the first class of the Development Training Institute. That program was to become the country's leading trainer of community-based development leaders. This excerpt captures central themes of the Baroni genius: that America is not a melting pot, but a rich mosaic of cultures, ethnicity, histories, regions, and values, and that community development plans must be driven by that rich diversity and the participation of the communities themselves. He emphasized that families and community voluntary institutions are the places we find and nurture the framework of values that must be the foundation of society and of community development planning. Baroni had a special charisma for finding grassroots leaders who understood those insights and for encouraging them to organize community institutions to win empowerment and legitimacy as the mechanisms of community development, not just its passive beneficiaries. Here is Monsignor Baroni.
We're not a melting pot. Hell, as I said, my father and mother couldn't read or write. They never went to third grade. They got off the boat, they went in the coal mines, My mother worked 17 years as a maid. For 27 years of American education, I was taught to melt or get off the pot, in a sense, And, to level out. Everybody's going to be the same. That's why if I was lucky you had all that different bread. I'm not going to end up being Wonder Bread, because that's where my nephews and nieces are, There's no taste, no crust. You got to put vitamins in it. It ain't nothing. And even, quote, white kids wanted to be somebody. Everybody has to be somebody. And everybody has to have a story. And everybody has to have values. But there are no values in the private corporate sector. Gandhi was always right. It's not the needy of the world that are the problem. It's the greedy. And there are very little or no values much in government. And where are values? The values are where you come from. The values are your story. If you don't have a story, you're a nobody. You have to have a story. You have to know who you are before you can relate to someone else. And so America is not a melting pot. America is the most racially, ethnically, culturally, religiously, regionally, pluralistic country in the world. We have to learn how to celebrate that diversity and celebrate that pluralism and recognize the valued variance of the common humanity. You come from the most important part of American society. You come from the biggest sector of American society where no research has been done. Nobody knows what's going on in your sector. We don't even know what to call the sector that you and I come from and are interested in. We don't know what to call it. There's no name. You got the public sector, right? And so on. Everybody knows. You got the private sector, right? And so on. Well, the public sector is what? Federal, state, and local government, right? Somebody said, don't use a flipboard. I said, well, I was trained by McNeely. You got to use something. I mean, the pupils got to learn from the teacher. And, you got a private sector, corporations and business and finance and so on. But here's another sector, Here's another sector. What is it? This is the non-governmental sector. This is the voluntary sector. This is the non-profit sector. This is a third sector, So on. This is a community sector. This sector is the most important part of American society. Our society, see, they talk about the public sector and the private sector are going to do everything, Okay, but that ain't enough. See, you can't leave somebody out. You ever watch television? All those guys look the same, the gals, Well, unless, like in Washington, unless you, some highfalutin guy, or unless you're down and out on the street, if you're in between, you're nothing. You don't exist. And so on. It's almost as if this sector doesn't exist. Yet the non-governmental, voluntary, religious, non-profit sector is the largest sector of our society. The largest sector. The biggest. We don't have a name. It's not been researched. It's not studied. It's not really identified. But if we're going to rebuild a more humane and just society, this is the most important part of the American equation. Values are found in family and in religion and in groups and in free associations and organizations that people start themselves. That's where you find value. You find values in family, and you find values in neighborhoods and in communities, and so on. One of the problems that churches have, and I found this whether it was Decatur, Alabama, or Chicago, Illinois, or wherever, that you go inside the church and they're singing all these hymns about going to heaven, and you come outside the church and the neighborhood is going to hell, and there's no connection. Government does certain things real well, and should do, and there should be just government. I'm not talking about that. But when it comes to talk about community development and other kinds of things, government doesn't do it so very well. What I'm saying is that we need a three-sectored society that has equity, that can deal with the public sector government, the private sector business. And so your talents and your gifts, hopefully, lots of times I used to wake up and get very upset because I thought that with what's happening with the new administration, that what you're doing would become an endangered species. And there wouldn't be anybody else out there trying to put something together. But it's not true. Why? Because I think the Spirit, provides new gifts to meet new needs, whether it's the human spirit or some other spirit, whatever you want to call it. And you're part of that response to providing new gifts to meet new needs and how to do what? How to create community.